Four identical faces stared back at Marcus Sullivan from behind a chain-link fence, their small hands gripping the metal like prisoners. What he discovered next would shatter everything he thought he knew about his life and change the fate of four children who had been surviving on their own for months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain had been falling steadily for 3 days, turning the pathways of Riverside Memorial Cemetery into muddy streams. Marcus Sullivan pulled his black wool coat tighter as he made his familiar walk to Section C, Row 15. Every Sunday for the past 2 years, he had come here to visit the grave of Sarah Chen, the woman who had loved him despite his flaws and left him when he couldn't change. Marcus was 34 years old, a successful software architect who had built his career on solving complex problems for major corporations. His downtown Chicago apartment overlooked Lake Michigan. His bank account held more money than he could spend in a lifetime, and his refrigerator contained nothing but takeout containers and energy drinks. Success, he had learned, was a poor substitute for the warmth Sarah had brought to his world. As he approached Sarah's grave, something seemed different. The usually pristine headstone was surrounded by small offerings, wildflowers that looked like they'd been picked from the cemetery's own gardens, smooth stones arranged in careful patterns, and what appeared to be hand-drawn pictures wrapped in plastic bags to protect them from the rain. Marcus knelt beside the grave, confusion mixing with the familiar ache of loss. "Someone's been visiting you," he whispered to the granite marker. "Who else remembers you, Sarah?" That's when he heard them. Soft voices, barely audible above the rain, coming from behind the large oak tree about 30 feet away. Marcus stood. Slowly, his programmer's mind immediately cataloguing the unusual situation. Children's voices in a cemetery during a rainstorm seemed unlikely. Children's voices speaking in hushed, urgent tones seemed concerning. He moved quietly toward the tree, his expensive leather shoes squelching in the wet grass. What he saw stopped him completely. 4 children, no older than 9 or 10, huddled together beneath the sprawling branches. They were identical in a way that took his breath away. The same dark hair, the same serious brown eyes, the same delicate bone structure that reminded him of someone he couldn't quite place. 3 boys and a girl, all wearing mismatched clothes that were too big for their small frames. The girl was speaking in a voice that carried authority despite her size. "We can't stay here much longer, guys. The groundskeeper will do his evening rounds soon." One of the boys, distinguishable only by a small scar above his left eyebrow, shook his head. "But we promised we'd come every week. We promised, Mom." Marcus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Mom. These children were visiting their mother's grave, just as he was visiting Sarah's. But something about their serious expressions, their worn clothing, and their obvious need for shelter suggested a story far more complex than a typical family visit. "I know, Connor," the girl replied patiently, "but if they catch us sleeping here again, they'll call those people from the county. Remember what happened to the Martinez kids?" Another boy, slightly smaller than the others, spoke up. "Emma's right. We need to find somewhere else for tonight." His voice carried a maturity that shouldn't have existed in someone so young. The 4th child had been silent until now. He sat apart from the others by a few inches, his arms wrapped around his knees, staring at a collection of graves with an intensity that seemed beyond his years. "What if we just told someone?" he said quietly. "What if we explained that we don't want to be separated?" "Nobody cares about keeping us together, Riley," Emma responded with the bitter wisdom of experience. "The system doesn't work that way." Marcus stood frozen behind his own tree, accidentally eavesdropping on what was clearly a family meeting. These 4 children were living alone, sleeping in a cemetery, and visiting their mother's grave while trying to stay together. The programmer in him wanted to step away, to respect their privacy, and avoid getting involved in what was obviously a complicated situation. But something deeper kept his feet planted in the muddy ground. Riley, the quiet one, suddenly stood and walked directly to Sarah's grave. Marcus watched in stunned silence as the boy knelt where he himself had been kneeling just minutes before, placing his small hand on the headstone. "She was special," Riley said, his voice carrying back to his. "Siblings, look at all the things people left for her." The other three joined him, forming a semicircle around Sarah's grave. Emma picked up one of the plastic-wrapped drawings. "This one's really good. Whoever drew this really loved her." Connor traced the carved letters of Sarah's name with his finger. Sarah Chen. She was young when she died, only 28. "Same age as Mom," the third boy observed softly. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Sarah had been 28 when the cancer took her. These children's mother had also been 28. The mathematical precision of the coincidence felt like more than chance. Emma stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. "We should go. This feels too much like spying on someone else's sadness." But Riley remained kneeling. "What if she's connected to Mom somehow? What if there's a reason we always end up here when we're scared?" "Don't be silly," Connor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Dead people don't send signs." "How do you know?" Riley challenged. "Mom always said there were things in the world we couldn't understand, things that happened for reasons we might not see right away." Marcus found himself stepping forward before his rational mind could stop him. 4 pairs of identical eyes turned toward him with the alertness of deer sensing a predator. The children instinctively moved closer together, forming a protective unit. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I didn't mean to startle you. I was visiting someone too." Emma, clearly the spokesperson for the group, stepped slightly in front of her brothers. "We weren't doing anything wrong. We're just paying respects." "I can see that," Marcus replied gently. "The flowers you left are beautiful. Sarah would have loved them." Riley's eyes widened. "You knew her? Sarah Chen?" Marcus nodded, surprised by the hope in the boy's voice. She was very important to me." The 4 children exchanged glances, communicating in the wordless way that twins and close siblings often did. Finally, Emma spoke again. "Our Mum's name was Jennifer Sullivan. She's buried 3 rows over. Sullivan." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at the 4 faces looking up at him, seeing for the first time not just their similarity to each other, but their resemblance to someone else entirely. The dark hair that was exactly like his own, the brown eyes that matched the ones he saw in the mirror every morning, the stubborn set of their jaws that his own mother had always said he'd inherited from his father. "Sullivan," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Connor nodded. "Jennifer Marie Sullivan. She died 6 months ago." The world seemed to stop rotating. Marcus calculated backwards frantically. 6 months ago, he had been dealing with Sarah's final illness. 6 months ago, he had been so consumed with grief and medical appointments that he had barely noticed anything else happening in the world. But 9 years ago, he had been a different person entirely. Younger, more reckless, less careful about the consequences of his actions. 9 years ago, there had been a woman named Jennifer who had loved him desperately and whom he had left because he wasn't ready for the commitment she wanted. Jennifer, who had called him 3 months after he'd moved to Chicago to tell him something important, something he had been too proud and too afraid to hear. Jennifer, whose call he had let go to voicemail and never returned because he was building his career and didn't want complications from his past. Marcus stared at the 4 children, Emma, Connor, Riley, and the third boy whose name he still didn't know, and saw his own features reflected back at him like an impossible mirror. "What did you say your last name was?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Sullivan," Emma replied, her voice cautious. Why? Marcus Sullivan looked at the 4 children who shared his name, his features, and apparently his stubbornness, and realized that his carefully constructed life had just become infinitely more complicated. Because, he said, his voice shaking slightly, I think I might be your father. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence that followed Marcus's words seemed to stretch for an eternity. 4 pairs of eyes stared at him with expressions ranging from disbelief to anger to something that might have been hope. The rain continued to fall around them, creating a curtain of privacy in the otherwise empty cemetery. Emma was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp with protective fury. That's not funny. Our mom said our dad was dead. Marcus felt the words hit him like a physical blow. Dead. Jennifer had told their children he was dead, rather than explain why he had abandoned them. The weight of that deception and his role in creating it settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket. She told you I was dead? He asked quietly. Don't! Connor stepped forward, his small fists clenched. Don't pretend you knew her, don't pretend you cared about her. But Riley, the observant one, was studying Marcus's face with disturbing intensity. You have the same eyes as us, he said slowly, and the same chin. The 4th boy, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. I'm Austin, he said, as if introducing himself to a stranger rather than to someone claiming to be his father. And if you really are our dad, where have you been for 9 years? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked at these 4 children, his children, and realized he had no acceptable answer. The truth was ugly and selfish and would hurt them even more than they had already been hurt. I made a terrible mistake, he said finally, his voice barely audible above the rain. Your mother tried to tell me about you, and I was too young and too scared to listen. Emma's laugh was bitter and harsh, a sound no 9-year-old should be capable of making. Too scared? We've been living on the streets for 6 months, hiding from social services, eating whatever we can find, and you were too scared to answer a phone call. The accuracy of her assessment stung, because it was absolutely true. Marcus had been too scared, too selfish, too focused on his own ambitions to consider that his actions might have consequences beyond his immediate comfort. You're right, he admitted. I was a coward. I was building my career, and I didn't want anything to complicate. I thought I had time to figure things out later. Later! Connor repeated sarcastically. Like after our mom got sick? Like after she died working 3 jobs to take care of us by herself? Each word was a knife twist, but Marcus forced himself to listen. These children had earned the right to their anger, and he had no right to defend himself against it. Austin, who seemed to be the most analytical of the 4, tilted his head slightly. What kind of work do you do now, since your career was so important? I'm a software architect. I design computer systems for large companies. Do you make good money? Riley asked, his question seeming genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Marcus nodded, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I do well. Good enough to have helped us? Emma's voice was deadly quiet. Good enough to have made sure we didn't have to choose between staying together and having a place to sleep? The implications of her words crashed over Marcus like a wave. While he had been accumulating wealth and success, his children had been struggling to survive. While he had been enjoying the luxury of his Lakeview apartment, they had been sleeping in a cemetery. How long have you been on your own? He asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Mom got sick 8 months ago, Austin replied matter-of-factly. Lung cancer, even though she never smoked a day in her life. She kept working, as long as she could, but the medical bills. He trailed off, but Marcus could fill in the blanks. Medical bills that might have been manageable with 2 incomes. Medical bills that could have been easily covered by someone with his financial resources. The county wanted to split us up, Connor continued the story. Put us in different foster homes, because they said it was too hard to place 4 kids together. Mom made us promise we'd stay together no matter what. So when she died, we ran, Riley added simply. We've been taking care of each other ever since. Marcus looked at these 4 remarkable children who had survived circumstances that would have broken most adults. They had kept their promise to their mother, protected each other, and somehow maintained their dignity in the face of impossible odds. "Where have you been staying?" Marcus asked. Emma's expression became guarded again. "Different places. Sometimes the cemetery when it's warm. Sometimes the old warehouse district when it's cold. We're careful not to stay anywhere too long." "What about school?" "We teach each other," Austin said with obvious pride. "Mom always said education was the most important thing. Riley's really good at math. Connor knows a lot about science. Emma reads everything she can find, and I'm good at fixing things." The organizational structure they had created for their survival was both impressive and heartbreaking. 4 9-year-olds had essentially created their own family unit, complete with educational responsibilities and survival strategies. "And food?" Marcus found himself asking, though he was afraid of the answer. The children exchanged glances, and Marcus realized he had touched on a sensitive subject. Finally, Connor spoke up. "We manage. There are places that throw away food that's still good, and sometimes people at the church give us sandwiches if we help with yard work." The image of his children, and they were his children, he realized, with growing certainty, scavenging for food while he ordered expensive takeout every night, made Marcus feel physically sick. "Listen," he said, his voice stronger now with decision. "I know I have no right to ask this, and I know you have no reason to trust me, but it's getting dark and it's still raining. I have an apartment downtown, there's plenty of room, and you'd be warm and safe." The suspicious looks that passed between the children were immediate and intense. Emma stepped even more protectively in front of her brothers. "Adults who offer strange kids places to stay usually want something in return," she said flatly. The statement revealed a worldliness that no child should possess, and Marcus realized that their months of survival had taught them lessons about the darker aspects of human nature. "I don't want anything except to make sure you're safe," Marcus said. "Just for tonight. Just until we can figure out what happens next." "What happens next is that you call the county and they split us up," Austin said with certainty. "That's what adults do. They make decisions about what's best for kids without asking the kids what they want." Riley, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly stepped forward. "What if we stayed together? Would you promise that we could stay together?" Marcus looked at the small boy's hopeful face and felt something crack inside his chest. "I promise," he said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. "Whatever happens, I promise you won't be separated." Emma studied his face for a long moment, clearly trying to decide whether he was trustworthy. Finally, she spoke for all of them. "One night," she said. "We'll try one night, but if you try anything or if you call anyone, we're gone." Marcus nodded, solemnly. "Understood." One night, as they gathered their few possessions, a backpack containing what appeared to be their entire worldly belongings, Marcus realized that his life had just taken a turn he never could have anticipated. 3 hours ago, he had been a successful bachelor with no responsibilities beyond his next software project. Now he was responsible for 4 children who had survived more hardship than he had ever experienced. The walk to his car was quiet, with the children staying close together while maintaining a careful distance from him. As Marcus started the engine and began the drive toward downtown Chicago, he caught glimpses of their faces in the rearview mirror. They were alert, watchful, ready to run at the first sign of danger. What Marcus didn't realize was that this one night would become the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, responsibility, and what it truly meant to be a father. The city lights began to twinkle through the rain as they drove toward an uncertain future, 6 strangers bound together by blood and circumstance, about to discover whether love could be built from the wreckage of past mistakes. Marcus's luxury apartment building on North Lakeshore Drive represented everything he had worked to achieve. The doorman, the marble lobby, the high-speed elevators, and the breathtaking views of Lake Michigan through floor-to-ceiling windows. As they rode the elevator to the 28th floor, Marcus watched his children's faces in the polished steel doors and saw a mixture of awe and discomfort. "This is where you live?" Riley whispered, his eyes wide as they stepped into the hallway with its plush carpeting and soft lighting. Marcus nodded, suddenly seeing his world through their eyes. The monthly rent on his 2-bedroom apartment probably exceeded what their mother had made in 6 months working multiple jobs. The guilt sat heavy in his stomach as he fumbled with his keys. The apartment door swung open to reveal a space that was undeniably impressive and utterly sterile. Modern furniture arranged with mathematical precision, a kitchen that looked like it had never been used, and not a single personal photograph or memento visible anywhere. Emma stepped inside cautiously, her siblings close behind. "It doesn't look like anyone lives here," she observed quietly. "It doesn't feel like anyone lives here either," Connor added, running his finger along a spotless glass coffee table. Marcus realized they were right. His apartment was a showcase, not a home. Even after 2 years of living here, it felt more like an expensive hotel room than a place where life actually happened. Austin had gravitated toward the wall of electronic equipment. The massive television, gaming console, sound system, and computer setup that had cost more than most people's cars. "Do you actually use all this stuff?" he asked. "Sometimes," Marcus replied, though the truth was he rarely did anything at home except sleep and work on his laptop. "Are you interested in technology?" Austin nodded enthusiastically. "I like figuring out how things work. Back at Mom's place, I fixed our old radio and made it pick up police scanners by accident. While Austin explored the electronics, Riley had discovered Marcus's home office. The boy stood transfixed by the wall of computer monitors and the complex setup Marcus used. "For his software development work, what do you build with all this?" Riley asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Marcus found himself explaining his current project, a system that helped hospitals manage patient information more efficiently. As he spoke, he noticed Riley asking surprisingly sophisticated questions about data structures and user interfaces. "How did you learn about computers?" Marcus asked. "The library," Riley replied simply. "They have free computer time, and I read all the programming books they had. Mom said learning was the only thing no one could ever take away from us." Meanwhile, Emma had been conducting her own investigation. She stood in the kitchen, opening cabinets that contained nothing but expensive appliances that appeared unused and takeout containers in the refrigerator. "When was the last time you cooked actual food?" she asked, her tone more curious than accusatory. Marcus couldn't remember. Probably not since Sarah had been healthy enough to cook for them. "I usually order in," he admitted. Emma shook her head, with the exasperated expression of someone far older than her years. "No wonder you look so tired all the time. Takeout food doesn't have real nutrition." "You know about nutrition?" Marcus asked, surprised. "When you're responsible for keeping 3 brothers healthy on almost no money, you learn about nutrition fast," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "Rice and beans give you complete protein. Canned vegetables are almost as good as fresh ones. And you can make soup out of almost anything if you're creative. The casual way she discussed the survival skills she had developed at age 9 made Marcus's chest tighten. While he had been consuming expensive restaurant meals without thought, his daughter had been learning to stretch food budgets and maximize nutritional value for her family. Connor had discovered Marcus's bedroom and was standing at the window, looking out at the lake. "The water's really pretty from up here," he said softly. "Mom used to take us to the lake sometimes on her days off. We'd bring peanut butter sandwiches and watch the boats." "You can see the lake any time you want from here," Marcus offered, trying to sound generous. Connor turned to look at him, and Marcus was struck by how much the boy's serious expression resembled Jennifer's when she was thinking deeply about something. "For one night," Connor said carefully. "You said this was just for one night." The reminder brought the temporary nature of their situation crashing back into focus. Marcus had invited them here without any plan beyond getting them out of the rain. He had no idea what happened next, no framework for how to navigate the complex realities of suddenly discovering he was responsible for 4 children who had been surviving without him. "We should talk about that," Marcus said, gesturing for them all to sit down. The children arranged themselves on his expensive leather couch, sitting close together in the unconscious protective formation they had clearly developed over months of looking out for each other. Marcus pulled over a chair to face them, realizing this was probably the most important conversation he would ever have. "First, I want you to know that I meant what I said. Whatever happens, you won't be separated. I promise you that." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. "How can you promise that? You don't even know us." "You're right," Marcus admitted. "I don't know you yet. But I can see how you take care of each other, how you've kept your promise to your mother, and how you've survived things that would break most adults. You're extraordinary kids, and you deserve to stay together." Austin leaned forward slightly. "What are you saying exactly?" Marcus took a deep breath, making a decision that surprised even him. "I'm saying that if you want to, if you think you could trust me enough to try, I'd like you to stay, not just tonight, permanently." The silence that followed was deafening. 4 sets of eyes stared at him with expressions ranging from shock to skepticism, to something that might have been cautious hope. "You want us to live here?" Riley asked quietly. "All of us. We'd have to make some changes," Marcus said, his mind racing as he thought through the practical implications. "This place isn't set up for a family. We'd need to find somewhere bigger, somewhere that feels like a real home." Emma's protective instincts kicked in immediately. "What's the catch? Adults don't just offer to take care of 4 kids they don't know. What do you want from us?" The question revealed so much about what these children had learned about the world during their months of survival. They had encountered adults who wanted to use them, exploit them, or separate them for bureaucratic convenience. "I don't want anything from you," Marcus said honestly. "But I do want something for you. I want you to have the childhood your mother wanted you to have. I want you to go to school and have friends and not worry about where your next meal is coming from or whether you'll have a place to sleep." "And what about you?" Connor asked, his voice challenging. "What do you get out of this deal?" Marcus considered the question seriously. What did he get? His comfortable, controlled, predictable life would be completely upended. His career would have to accommodate the needs of 4 children. His financial resources would be stretched in ways he had never experienced. His bachelor lifestyle would disappear overnight. "I get a chance to be the father I should have been 9 years ago," he said finally. "I get a chance to keep a promise I should have made to your mother a long time ago." The children exchanged glances, having another of their silent conversations. Finally, Emma spoke for all of them. "We need to think about it," she said, "and we need to know more about you, like what happens when you get tired of having us around. What happens if you decide kids are too much trouble?" "That's fair," Marcus agreed. "What do you want to know?" For the next 2 hours, 4 9-year-olds conducted the most thorough interview of Marcus's life. They asked about his work schedule, his financial stability, his experience with children, his plans for their education, and his understanding of what it meant to be responsible for their daily needs. Their questions revealed intelligence, maturity, and a deep understanding of what they needed from an adult who wanted to be trusted with their lives. They had clearly thought extensively about what a safe, stable home would look like, and they weren't going to accept anything less. As the night grew later and the children's exhaustion became apparent, Marcus showed them to his guest room and office, quickly arranging sleeping spaces with extra blankets and pillows. "Tomorrow we'll figure out something better," he promised as they settled in for the night. But as Marcus lay awake in his own bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the soft sounds of other people living in his space for the first time in years, he realized that tomorrow would bring challenges he couldn't yet imagine. He was about to learn that being a father to 4 brilliant, damaged, fiercely independent children would require him to become a completely different person than he had ever been before. Marcus woke at 6 a.m. to the sound of voices and the smell of something he hadn't experienced in his apartment for over 2 years: actual cooking. He pulled on a robe and padded to the kitchen, where he found Emma standing on a chair at the stove, expertly managing 3 different pans, while her brothers sat at his rarely used dining table. "What's all this?" Marcus asked, genuinely amazed. "Breakfast," Emma replied without turning around. "Real breakfast. I found eggs, some vegetables that were about to go bad, and bread that was still decent. Austin found salt and pepper in the back of one of your cabinets." Riley looked up from what appeared to be homework spread across the table. "Emma makes the best scrambled eggs. She learned from watching cooking shows at the electronics store when we were waiting for warm weather." Connor was organizing what looked like a small pile of coins and crumpled bills. "We counted our money," he announced. "We have $17.38. We want to pay you for the food." The offer hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. These children, who had been surviving on scraps, wanted to pay him for breakfast ingredients that probably cost less than one of his typical coffee shop visits. "You don't need to pay me for food," Marcus said gently. "Yes, we do," Austin said firmly. "Mom always said we shouldn't take things we couldn't pay for. It makes people think they own you." The wisdom in that statement, learned through hard experience, revealed so much about what these kids had encountered during their months of survival. Marcus sat down at the table, accepting the plate Emma handed him with a shy smile. The eggs were perfect, better than anything he had eaten in months of expensive restaurant meals. As they ate together, the first real meal Marcus had shared with anyone in his apartment, he watched his children interact with each other. They had developed subtle systems of communication and cooperation that spoke to months of depending entirely on each other. Emma automatically served everyone else before herself. Riley quietly helped Austin with math problems written on a piece of cardboard. Connor kept track of their shared resources with the precision of an accountant. "What's the plan for today?" Emma asked, her practical nature asserting itself. Marcus realized he had no plan. He had called in sick to work the night before, but he had no framework for how to handle the immediate logistics of suddenly being responsible for 4 children. "Well," he began uncertainly, "we probably need to talk about school and clothes and making this legal," Connor interrupted. "If we're going to stay, it has to be legal. Otherwise they'll just take us away when they find us." Riley nodded in agreement. "The system doesn't like it when kids live with people who aren't officially their guardians. We learned that the hard way." Austin looked up from his math problems. "What does that mean exactly? Making it legal?" Marcus found himself explaining legal guardianship and adoption processes to 4 9-year-olds who listened with the focused attention of adults planning a business merger. Their questions were specific and revealing of their experiences with bureaucracy. "How long does the process take?" Emma asked. "Usually several months, with background checks and home studies and court appearances," Marcus replied. What happens to us during those months? Connor's question cut to the heart of their concern. There are temporary custody arrangements, Marcus said, then saw their expressions. But those would keep you together. I promise. The conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone ringing. The caller ID showed his office number, and Marcus realized he couldn't avoid his responsibilities indefinitely. I have to take this, he told the children. It's work. Marcus? His project manager's voice was sharp with concern. Where are you? The Peterson presentation is in 2 hours, and the client is asking specifically for you. Marcus looked around. His kitchen at 4 children who had transformed his sterile apartment into something that felt alive for the first time in years. The Peterson presentation was important, potentially worth millions to his company, but it seemed insignificant compared to what was happening in his personal life. I'm dealing with a family emergency, Marcus said, surprising himself with the words. Can someone else handle the presentation? The silence on the other end of the phone was telling. Marcus had never missed an important meeting, never put anything ahead of work priorities. Family emergency, his manager repeated. Marcus, you don't have family. The statement, though technically true until yesterday, stung. Marcus looked at Riley, who was quietly solving algebraic equations that most high school students would struggle with, and Emma, who was efficiently cleaning the kitchen with the practiced movements of someone who had been managing household. Responsibilities far longer than she should have been. That's changed, Marcus said simply. I'll be in tomorrow and we can reschedule with Peterson. After ending the call, Marcus found 4 pairs of eyes watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. You stayed home from work because of us? Austin asked quietly. It seemed more important, Marcus replied. Emma's skeptical expression softened slightly. Mom never got to stay home when we were sick. She couldn't afford to miss work. The comment reminded Marcus of the financial security he had always taken for granted. While Jennifer had been making impossible choices between her children's needs and economic survival, he had been accumulating wealth and career success without a second thought. We should go see Mom, Riley said suddenly. I want to tell her. About you. Connor nodded in agreement. She deserves to know we're okay. The idea of returning to the cemetery where this had all begun felt like closing a circle. Marcus found himself agreeing, and within an hour they were back at Riverside Memorial, standing together at Jennifer's grave. Marcus read the headstone properly for the first time. Jennifer Marie Sullivan, beloved mother, aged 28. Below that, in smaller text, she loved her children with her whole heart. We brought someone to meet you, Mom, Emma said softly, kneeling beside the grave. His name is Marcus, and he says he's our dad. Riley placed a fresh flower he had picked from the cemetery's garden. He's trying to take care of us the way you did. We think you'd want us to give him a chance. Connor's voice was barely audible. We miss you every day, but we're keeping our promise to stay together. Austin, the most reserved of the 4, spoke last. We love you, Mom, and we think maybe you sent him to find us. Standing there in the autumn sunshine, Marcus felt the weight of Jennifer's love for these children and the magnitude of the responsibility he was accepting. These weren't just 4 kids who needed a home. They were a family unit that had been forged through shared hardship and maintained through fierce loyalty to each other and to their mother's memory. As they walked back to the car, Emma fell into step beside Marcus. There's something you should know, she said quietly. We talked last night after you went to sleep. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What did you decide? We want to try, Emma said simply, but we have conditions. The fact that 4 9-year-olds had conditions for their potential guardian was both touching and slightly intimidating. What kind of conditions? Connor joined the conversation. First, we all stay together no matter what, no splitting us up for any reason. Second, Riley added. We keep going to Mum's grave every week. Austin's condition was practical, and we want to learn everything we can. Real school, but also the things we're interested in. Emma's final condition was the most revealing. And if you ever decide you don't want us anymore, you have to give us enough warning to make our own plans. No just abandoning us. The last condition broke Marcus's heart because it revealed these children's deepest fear, being abandoned again by someone they had learned to trust. I accept all your conditions, Marcus said seriously, but I have one, condition of my own. 4 pairs of eyes looked at him curiously. You have to promise to tell me when I'm doing something wrong, Marcus said. I've never been a father before, and I'm going to make mistakes, but I want to learn how to be what you need. As they drove back toward downtown Chicago, Marcus realized that his life had just taken a turn that would require him to become someone entirely different from who he had been. The successful, isolated software architect was about to learn what it really meant to be responsible for the people who mattered most. The first crisis came on a Tuesday morning. Exactly 1 week after the children had moved into Marcus's apartment, he woke to find Emma sitting on the bathroom floor, tears streaming down her face, with Riley holding a wet washcloth to her forehead. What happened? Marcus asked, immediately kneeling beside them. She's sick, Riley explained quietly. Fever and throwing up. It started about an hour ago. Connor appeared in the doorway, his face pale with worry. Is she going to be okay? When Mum got sick, it started like this. The fear in his voice revealed the trauma these children carried. Their mother's illness had begun with seemingly minor symptoms before spiraling into something that ultimately took her life. For them, any sickness triggered memories of loss and abandonment. It's probably just a flu bug, Marcus said gently, though he felt his own panic rising. He had no experience with sick children, no framework for knowing when something was serious versus routine. Austin joined his brothers in the doorway. Should we call a doctor? Mum always said to call a doctor if someone had a fever over 102. Marcus checked Emma's temperature, 103.2 degrees. High enough to warrant medical attention, but he faced an immediate problem he hadn't anticipated. Taking Emma to a hospital or urgent care would require paperwork, insurance information, and legal guardianship. Documentation he didn't yet have. We can't go to the hospital, Emma whispered weakly. They'll ask questions we can't answer. She was right. Without legal custody, Marcus had no right to make medical decisions for any of the children. If hospital staff discovered 4 children living with a man who wasn't their legal guardian, social services would be called immediately. There's a free clinic downtown, Connor said quietly. We went there sometimes when Mom couldn't afford the regular doctor. They don't ask as many questions. The fact that his 9-year-old children knew about free clinics and medical care accessibility issues made Marcus feel sick with guilt. While he had been enjoying premium health insurance and concierge medical services, his children had been navigating a healthcare system that treated poor families as obstacles rather than patients. Marcus made a decision. We're going to the best pediatrician in the city. I'll handle the paperwork issues. 2 hours later, they sat in the waiting room of Northwestern Children's Hospital's emergency department. Marcus had called ahead, explaining the situation to the intake nurse with as much honesty as he could manage, without triggering an immediate social services investigation. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, the attending pediatrician, was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and the no-nonsense manner of someone who had seen everything. After examining Emma thoroughly, she pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. The child has a severe case of influenza, but it's treatable with rest and medication, Dr. Hendricks began. However, I have some concerns about her overall. Her health status. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What kind of concerns? She's underweight for her age and shows signs of chronic stress and malnutrition, not severe, but consistent with a period of food insecurity. Dr. Hendricks studied Marcus's face carefully. Her brothers show similar indicators. How long have these children been in your care? The question was loaded with implications. Marcus realized he was walking a tightrope between honesty and protecting the children from being separated. It's complicated, Marcus said finally. I'm in the process of filing for legal guardianship. These are my biological children, but I've only recently been able to take custody of them. Dr. Hendricks nodded slowly. I see. And before that? They were living in difficult circumstances, Marcus admitted. I'm trying to make sure they have everything they need now. The doctor was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing her professional obligations against her assessment of the situation. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Sullivan, I'm required to report cases where children show signs of neglect or abuse. However, I can see that these children are well cared for now, and that you're committed to their well-being. She paused. I'm going to recommend that you expedite the legal guardianship process and get these children established with regular pediatric care as soon as possible. Marcus nodded gratefully. We will. Thank you. There's something else, Dr. Hendricks added. The children mentioned their mother died of lung cancer. Given their ages and the genetic component of some cancers, I'd recommend comprehensive health screenings for all 4 of them. The drive home was quiet, with Emma sleeping in the back seat and her brothers watching her with protective concern. Marcus had filled prescriptions for antibiotics and fever reducers, but he knew the real healing would take time. That evening, as Emma rested in the guest room and her brothers took turns checking on her, Marcus received a phone call that changed. Everything, Mr. Sullivan. This is Janet Morrison from Cook County Child and Family Services. We received a report about 4 children who may be living in an unsafe situation. Marcus's blood ran cold. Someone had reported them. I'm not sure what you're referring to, he said carefully. We have information that you're housing 4 minor children without proper legal authorization. I need to schedule a home visit within the next 48 hours to assess the situation. After ending the call, Marcus sat in his kitchen, feeling the walls closing in around him. He had known this moment would come eventually, but he hadn't expected it so soon, or in the middle of Emma's illness. The children must have sensed his distress, because they appeared in the kitchen one by one, even Emma, who looked pale but determined. What's wrong? Riley asked directly. Marcus considered lying, protecting them from this new worry, but he remembered their condition about honesty. Social Services wants to do a home visit. Someone reported that you're living here without proper legal arrangements. The children's faces went white with terror. Connor spoke first, his voice shaking. They're going to split us up. No, Marcus said firmly. I promised you that wouldn't happen, and I meant it. But what can you do? Austin asked practically. The legal stuff takes months, and they're coming in 2 days. Emma, despite her illness, was thinking strategically. We could run again. We know how to survive on our own. Absolutely not, Marcus said with more force than he intended. You're not running anywhere. You're sick. It's getting colder, and this is your home now. The conviction in his own voice surprised him. Somewhere. In the past week, these 4 children had become his family in a way that went beyond biology or legal documents. The thought of them returning to the streets, especially with Emma ill, was unacceptable. Then what? Riley asked quietly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking through options that all seemed insufficient. Finally, he looked at each of his children, because that's what they were now, regardless of paperwork, and made a decision that would test everything he thought he knew about himself. We fight, he said simply. We get the best lawyer in Chicago. We document everything we can about your situation before I found you, and we make the case that you belong here. Connor's skeptical expression reflected all their experiences with adults who made promises they couldn't keep. And if that doesn't work? Marcus met his eyes directly. Then we figure out another way. But I'm not giving up on this family, and I'm not letting anyone separate you. Austin, ever practical, asked the crucial question. How do we prove we belong together when we've only known each other for a week? It was Emma who answered, her voice weak but certain. We tell them the truth, that we've been a family longer than we've been apart. Mum taught us that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when things get hard. As Marcus looked around his kitchen at 4 children who had chosen to trust him, despite every reason they had to protect themselves, he realized Emma was right. They had become a family not through time or shared history, but through shared commitment to each other. The next 48 hours would test whether love and determination could overcome bureaucracy and legal technicalities. Marcus had never fought for anything more important than a software contract, but he was about to learn that some battles were worth risking everything to win. The phone rang again. This time, it was the lawyer he had hired that afternoon. "Mr. Sullivan, we need to talk. The situation is more complicated than you initially described, and there are some things you need to know before the social services visit." As Marcus took the call, he caught glimpses of his children in the living room, huddled together on the couch, talking in the low, urgent voices of people planning for survival. They had faced impossible odds before, and won. Now they would face them together. Attorney Margaret Chen sat across from Marcus in her downtown office, surrounded by law books and case files that represented decades of family court battles. Her expression was grave as she reviewed the documents spread across her mahogany desk. "Mr. Sullivan, I need you to understand the severity of your situation," she began, her voice carrying the weight of professional experience. "Cook County Child Services has opened a formal investigation based on an anonymous tip. They're alleging that 4 minor children are living in an unsafe environment with an adult who has no legal relationship to them." Marcus felt his world tilting. "But I am their father. We can prove that with DNA tests." "Biological relationship isn't the issue here," Margaret replied, sliding a thick folder toward him. "The problem is that these children were never legally in your custody. In the eyes of the law, you've been harboring 4 runaway minors without reporting their situation to authorities." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. "Harboring? I was helping them. They were living on the streets." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I understand your intentions were good, but the system doesn't always recognize good intentions. The children's previous living situation creates additional complications." She opened another file, revealing photographs and documents that made Marcus's stomach turn. Pictures of the warehouse where the children had been sleeping, reports from other homeless youth about seeing 4 kids surviving alone, and medical records from the free clinic Connor had mentioned. "Child Services has been looking for these children for 6 months, Margaret continued. "There are active missing persons reports, and their case has been flagged as high priority due to their ages and the fact that they're quadruplets." Marcus stared at the photographs of makeshift shelters and the detailed reports of his children's survival strategies. They weren't missing. They were hiding. "There's a difference." "Not in the eyes of family court," Margaret said bluntly. "The caseworker assigned to your investigation is Janet Morrison. She's thorough, experienced, and has a reputation for prioritizing child safety over family preservation." The distinction sent chills down Marcus's spine. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means she's more likely to recommend immediate removal of the children to state custody pending a full investigation, rather than allowing them to remain with you during the legal process." Marcus thought of Emma, still recovering from her illness, and her brothers, who watched over her with the fierce protectiveness of people who had already lost everything once. How long would an investigation take? 6 months to a year, Margaret replied, during which time the children would be placed in foster care, most likely separated due to the difficulty of finding a home that can accommodate 4 siblings. The room seemed to spin around Marcus. Everything the children feared most, separation, return to the system that had failed them, loss of the family they had fought to preserve, was about to happen because he had tried to help them. "There has to be something we can do," Marcus said desperately. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying files with the intensity of a general planning a crucial battle. Finally, she looked up. "There might be one option, but it's risky and requires complete honesty from you and the children." "What is it?" "We petition for emergency guardianship based on the children's existing relationship with you and their expressed wishes to remain together. But we have to prove that you're the best available option for their care and that separating them would cause significant psychological harm." Marcus leaned forward. "How do we prove that?" "Character witnesses, psychological evaluations, evidence of the children's well-being in your care, and most importantly, we need the children themselves to testify about their experiences and their wishes." The thought of putting his children through testimony about their months of survival and their mother's death seemed cruel, but Marcus realized they were already living with those experiences every day. "What are our chances?" Margaret's expression was carefully neutral. "Honestly, maybe 40%. The system is designed to be cautious and your situation is irregular, but I've seen stranger cases succeed when the children's voices are heard clearly." 2 hours later, Marcus returned, home to find the children waiting for him in the living room. They had arranged themselves in their familiar protective formation, with Emma in the center despite still being pale from her illness. "What did the lawyer say?" Riley asked directly. Marcus sat down facing them, remembering their condition about honesty. "It's not good. Social Services wants to remove you from here immediately and place you in foster care while they investigate." The silence that followed was deafening. Connor's hands clenched into fists. Austin's face went completely blank. Emma closed her eyes, as if absorbing a physical blow. "For how long?" Emma asked quietly. 6 months to a year, and they would probably split you up." Riley's voice was barely audible. "So we're back to running?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "We have another option, but it means going to court and telling a judge about everything you've been through." "All of it?" Austin looked up sharply. "Everything." Marcus nodded. "Your mom's illness, the months on the streets, why you ran from foster care, what it was like surviving alone. The lawyer says it's the only way to prove that staying together is what's best for you." Emma straightened slightly, and Marcus saw a flash of the strength that had kept her family together through impossible circumstances. "What would happen in court?" "You would have to testify, answer questions from lawyers and a judge about your experiences. It won't be easy." Connor's voice was tight with anger. "Why should we have to prove we deserve to stay together? Why should we have to convince strangers that we know what's best for us?" The unfairness of it was staggering, but Marcus had learned that the world often demanded that the most vulnerable people prove their worth to systems that had already failed them. Because sometimes the only way to change an unfair system is to beat it at its own game, Marcus replied. "But I won't ask you to do this if you don't want to. We can try other options." Emma looked at each of her brothers, having another of their silent conversations. Finally, she spoke for all of them. "What happens if we lose? What happens if we tell them everything and they still split us up?" Marcus met her eyes directly. "Then we appeal, and we keep fighting until we find someone who listens." And if that doesn't work, Austin asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about resources he had never needed to consider before. Then we explore every legal option available, including moving somewhere with different laws if necessary. Riley leaned forward. You would do that? Give up your job and your life? Here, the question forced Marcus to confront the depth of his commitment to these children. A month ago, his career had been the center of his identity. Now, the thought of losing his family seemed infinitely more devastating than any professional setback. Yes, Marcus said simply. I would do whatever it takes. The children exchanged glances one more time, and Marcus waited for their decision, knowing that whatever they chose would determine not just their future, but the kind of person he would become. Emma stood up slowly, still weak from her illness, but with determination in her voice. When is the court date? Margaret is trying to get an emergency hearing scheduled for next week. Connor joined his sister. Then we better start practicing our story. Austin and Riley stood as well, forming a united front. It's not a story, Riley corrected quietly. It's the truth, and we're not afraid of the truth. As Marcus looked at these four extraordinary children who had decided to trust the system that had already failed them once, he realized they were about to face the biggest test of their lives. But for the first time since this began, he felt something unexpected: hope. They had survived homelessness, illness, and abandonment. They had kept their family together against impossible odds. Now they would face a courtroom full of adults who would decide their fate, armed with nothing but their courage and the truth of their unbreakable bond. The next morning would bring preparation for the most important battle of their lives. But tonight they were still together, still a family, still fighting for each other with everything they had. The conference room at Margaret Chen's law firm had been converted into a war room. Charts covered the walls showing custody laws, precedent, cases, and timelines. Marcus sat at one end of a long table, watching his children work with Margaret's team of paralegals and social workers to prepare for what might be the most important day of their lives. Emma, can you tell me again about the night you decided to leave the group home? Asked Dr. Linda Vasquez, the child psychologist Margaret had brought in to help prepare the children for testimony. Emma, now fully recovered from her illness, sat straighter in her chair. They wanted to send Riley to a different placement because they said he was too advanced for the other kids. They kept telling us we needed to adjust our expectations about staying together. Dr. Vasquez made notes on her legal pad. How did that make you feel? Angry, Emma replied honestly, and scared. We had already lost Mom. Losing each other would have been like dying. Connor leaned forward in his chair. That's when we started planning to run. We figured being homeless together was better than being separated in comfortable places. Margaret looked up from the case files she was reviewing. The court needs to understand that your decision to leave wasn't rebellion. It was survival. Dr. Vasquez, what's your professional assessment? Dr. Vasquez had been working with the children for 3 days, conducting psychological evaluations that would be crucial to their case. These children demonstrate remarkable resilience and emotional intelligence. Their bond is exceptionally strong, likely intensified by shared trauma and their role as each other's primary support system. She continued, flipping through her notes. Separating them now would constitute a significant psychological risk. They've developed interdependent coping mechanisms that have kept them functional through extraordinary stress. Austin, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. Does that mean we're broken? Dr. Vasquez's expression softened. No, Austin. It means you're incredibly strong. You've adapted to difficult circumstances in ways that show intelligence and emotional maturity far beyond your years. Riley had been working on a laptop, creating what he called a visual presentation of their story. I've been mapping out our survival strategies, he said, turning the screen so the adults could see. I thought maybe showing the court how we organized ourselves might help them understand we weren't just random homeless kids. The presentation was stunning. Riley had created detailed charts showing how they had divided responsibilities, managed resources, and maintained their health and education during their months on the streets. It was the work of someone with analytical skills that impressed. Even Marcus's programmer mind. "This is excellent, Riley," Margaret said, studying the charts. "It demonstrates planning, intelligence, and family cohesion. We'll definitely include this in our presentation." Thomas Chen, Margaret's son and a recent law school graduate, had been tasked with researching the opposition's likely strategy. "I've been looking into Janet Morrison's case history," he reported. "She's handled over 200 custody cases in the past 5 years. Her priority is always child safety, which usually means removing children from uncertain situations first and asking questions later." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "What's her success rate?" 93% of her recommendations are accepted by the court," Thomas replied grimly. "She's thorough, experienced, and judges trust her judgment." Emma's voice was steady despite the intimidating statistics. "What kinds of questions will she ask us?" Margaret pulled out a thick folder. "Based on her previous cases, she'll focus on your living conditions, your emotional state, and whether you understand the implications of your choices. She may also try to suggest that your loyalty to each other is preventing you from accepting help from the system." Connor's jaw tightened. "The system didn't help us. The system was the problem." "That's exactly what you need to communicate," Dr. Vasquez said. "But you need to do it calmly and clearly. The court needs to see that you're not just angry children, but young people who made rational decisions based on your experiences." Over the next 2 days, they practiced. The children learned to articulate their experiences without becoming emotional, to explain their decision-making process, and to demonstrate their individual personalities while showing their collective strength. Marcus watched Austin explain his interest in technology, Emma discuss her role as the family caretaker, Connor describe his protective instincts, and Riley present his academic achievements. Each child was remarkable individually, but together they formed something extraordinary. The evening before the hearing, Marcus found himself alone with Margaret in her office after the children had gone home with Dr. Vasquez for a final preparation session. "How are you holding up?" Margaret asked, noticing the stress lines around Marcus's eyes. "I keep thinking about what happens if we lose," Marcus admitted. "These kids have already been through so much. If the court separates them because I tried to help..." Margaret leaned back in her chair. "Marcus, in 20 years of family law, I've learned that the system isn't perfect. But sometimes, when children's voices are heard clearly and their needs are understood, the right decisions get made. And the other times? The other times, we appeal and keep fighting until we find someone who listens." Marcus nodded, remembering his promise to the children. "There's something I need to tell you, something that might affect the case." Margaret's attention sharpened. "What is it?" "I've been getting calls from my company. Missing work, changing priorities. It's affecting my position. There's a possibility I might lose my job over this." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "How would that affect your ability to care for the children?" Marcus had been thinking about this constantly. "I have savings, enough to support us for a couple of years while I figure out alternative income. But Janet Morrison will probably see job instability as another reason to remove the kids. Or," Margaret said thoughtfully, "she might see a father who's willing to sacrifice his career for his children's well-being. It depends on how we present it." That night, Marcus sat in his apartment kitchen, looking over the court documents one final time. The children were asleep, finally exhausted from days of preparation. Tomorrow, strangers would decide whether this family he had accidentally discovered and deliberately chosen would be allowed to continue existing. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Hope you're ready to lose those kids. You never deserved them anyway." A concerned citizen, Marcus stared at the message, realizing that someone had been watching their situation closely enough to get his personal phone number. The anonymous tip to social services, the timing of the investigation. Someone wanted this family destroyed. He deleted the message without responding, but the implications troubled him. This wasn't just about bureaucratic procedure. Someone was actively working against them. The next morning dawned grey and cold, matching Marcus's mood as he helped the children dress in their best clothes for court. They had practiced this routine, but seeing them in their formal outfits, Emma in a simple blue dress, the boys in button-down shirts and slacks, made the stakes feel suddenly, devastatingly real. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked as they gathered in the living room. 4 pairs of serious eyes looked back at him. These children had faced homelessness, hunger, illness, and loss. Now they were about to face a courtroom full of adults who would judge whether their family deserved to exist. "We're ready," Emma said, speaking for all of them as she so often did. As they left the apartment together, Marcus realized they were walking toward either the beginning of their legal recognition as a family or the end of everything they had built together. The system that had failed them once before would now decide their fate, but they were walking toward it together, and that gave Marcus a strength he had never known he possessed. The Cook County Family Court building loomed like a fortress of bureaucracy, its stone facade weathered by decades of family disputes and broken dreams. Marcus walked through the metal detectors with his children, each step echoing in the marble corridors that had witnessed countless custody battles. Judge Patricia Hernandez presided over courtroom 4B, a woman in her 50s whose reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for anyone who wasted the court's time. She studied the case file as the parties assembled, her expression revealing nothing about her initial impressions. Janet Morrison sat at the prosecutor's table, flanked by 2 junior attorneys and armed with binders of documentation that painted Marcus as an irresponsible adult who had endangered 4 vulnerable children. Her grey suit and severe expression conveyed the authority of someone who had never lost a case she believed in. Margaret Chen had positioned her team strategically, with Dr. Vasquez ready to provide expert testimony and Riley's presentation materials. Organized for maximum impact, the children sat behind the attorney's table, hands folded, looking far more composed than most adults facing such proceedings. This emergency hearing will determine temporary custody arrangements for Emma, Connor, Riley, and Austin Sullivan, Judge Hernandez announced. "Ms. Morrison, present your case." Janet Morrison stood with the confidence of someone who had performed this routine hundreds of times. "Your Honor, the state contends that these 4 children have been living in an unsuitable environment with an adult who lacks legal authority to care for them. Mr. Sullivan, despite claiming to be their biological father, has no custody rights and has failed to report these children to proper authorities for 6 months. She gestured to a large display board showing photographs of the warehouse where the children had been living before Marcus found them. These children were essentially homeless, living in dangerous conditions, exposed to criminal elements and health hazards. When Mr. Sullivan discovered them, his proper course of action should have been to immediately contact Child Protective Services. Morrison's presentation was thorough and damning. She displayed medical records showing the children's malnutrition, school attendance records revealing months of missed education, and testimonies from social workers who had been searching for them. Instead, Morrison continued, Mr. Sullivan chose to harbor these children in his apartment without proper vetting, background checks, or social services oversight. This decision, however well-intentioned, violated multiple state laws regarding child welfare and endangered the minors involved. Judge Hernandez made notes as Morrison spoke. What is the state's recommendation? Immediate removal to state custody, with placement in appropriate foster care arrangements, while proper procedures are followed for determining permanent custody. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus watched his children's faces remain carefully neutral, but he could see Emma's hands gripping the edge of her chair. Margaret Chen stood to respond. Your Honor, the state's presentation ignores the fundamental question, what is truly in the best interests of these children? She approached the bench with Riley's presentation materials. These children didn't end up homeless through neglect or abandonment by Mr. Sullivan. They became homeless when the system itself failed them. Margaret displayed documents showing the children's placement in separate foster homes and their subsequent decision to run away to stay together. The state had custody of these children for 2 weeks before they fled. During that time, Emma Sullivan was placed 40 miles away from her brothers, with no plan for maintaining family contact. Judge Hernandez leaned forward slightly. Continue. These children made a rational decision to preserve their family unit when the adult systems around them failed to do so. They organized themselves, maintained their health and education, and survived circumstances that would break many adults. Margaret gestured to the children. Rather than being victims who need rescue from Mr. Sullivan, these children found in him the one adult who understood their primary need, to remain together as a family. Dr. Vasquez was called to testify about her psychological evaluation. Her professional assessment was unequivocal. These children demonstrate exceptional resilience and emotional intelligence, she explained to the court. Their bond is not unhealthy, dependence, but rather a sophisticated support system that has enabled them to function through extraordinary trauma. She turned to face Judge Hernandez directly. Separating them now would constitute psychological abuse. They have already lost their mother and survived homelessness. Removing them from the one stable family situation they have found would be devastating. Then came the moment Marcus had been dreading, the children's testimony. Emma was called first. At 9 years old, she walked to the witness stand with the composure of someone far older, her small hand barely covering the Bible as she swore to tell the truth. Emma, Margaret began gently, can you tell the court why you and your brothers left the foster care placements? Emma's voice was clear and steady. They were going to split us up. The lady at the agency said it was unrealistic for us to expect, to stay together, and that we needed to be flexible about our family. How did that make you feel? Scared and angry. We had promised Mom we would take care of each other. Breaking that promise felt like losing her all over again. Janet Morrison's cross-examination was direct but not unkind. Emma, don't you think trained social workers might know better than children what's good for you? Emma considered the question seriously. Maybe sometimes, but they didn't know us. They didn't know that Riley has nightmares, and only I can calm him down, or that Connor won't eat when he's worried unless Austin reminds him, or that we've been taking care of each other since Mom got sick. But living on the streets was dangerous, wasn't it? Yes, Emma admitted, but being apart felt more dangerous. Riley's testimony focused on their survival strategies and educational achievements. When Morrison questioned whether a 9-year-old could make such important decisions, Riley responded with devastating simplicity. Adults make decisions about kids all the time without asking what the kids want. We decided to make decisions about ourselves because we were the ones who had to live with the consequences. Connor's testimony revealed the protective instincts that had kept his family safe. When asked about trusting Marcus, he said, "He's the first adult who listened to what we needed, instead of telling us what we should want." Austin, the most reserved of the four, spoke last. His testimony about their technical innovations and problem-solving abilities impressed even Judge Hernandez, who asked several follow-up questions about their self-directed learning. Austin, Margaret asked in conclusion, what would happen to you and your brothers and sister if you were separated now? Austin looked directly at the judge. We would survive because that's what we do. But surviving isn't the same as living. Living is what we've been doing with Marcus. The courtroom was silent as Austin returned to his seat. Judge Hernandez had been taking extensive notes throughout the testimony, her expression growing more thoughtful with each child's words. Janet Morrison made her final argument, emphasizing legal procedures and established protocols, but her presentation seemed somehow less convincing after hearing directly from the children themselves. Margaret's closing statement was brief but powerful. Your Honor, the law exists to protect children's welfare, not to separate families that are functioning successfully. These children have found stability, safety, and love with Mr. Sullivan. They have demonstrated remarkable wisdom in their choices and remarkable strength in their survival. She paused, looking at the 4 children who had somehow managed to preserve their family through impossible circumstances. The question before this court is not whether Mr. Sullivan followed proper procedures, but whether these children's voices will be heard when they tell us clearly what they need to thrive. Judge Hernandez announced a brief recess to review the case materials. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus sat with his children, waiting for a decision that would determine whether their family had a legal right to exist. Emma reached over and took his hand. Whatever happens, she said quietly, we want you to know that you kept your promise. You didn't let them separate us. Looking at these 4 extraordinary children who had taught him what family really meant, Marcus realized that regardless of the court's decision, they had already won something more, important than legal recognition. They had found each other, and that bond couldn't be dissolved by any judge's ruling. But as Judge Hernandez returned to the bench, Marcus held his breath, knowing that their future hung in the balance of one woman's decision about what constituted the best interests of 4 children who had already proven they knew their own minds. Judge Hernandez returned to the bench with a thick folder of notes and the expression that revealed nothing about her decision. The courtroom fell silent as she arranged her papers, every person present understanding that the next few minutes would reshape 5 lives forever. In my 23 years on the family court bench, Judge Hernandez began, I have rarely encountered a case that so clearly illustrates the gap between legal procedures and human reality. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. The children sat motionless, their hands linked together beneath the table. The state has presented a compelling case regarding procedural violations. Mr. Sullivan did indeed harbor 4 minor children without proper authorization. He failed to immediately report their situation to Child Protective Services. These are serious legal infractions that cannot be ignored. Janet Morrison's expression showed quiet satisfaction. She had built her career on such clear-cut procedural arguments. However, Judge Hernandez continued, and the single word changed. The entire atmosphere in the room. This court must consider not just what the law requires, but what justice demands. She looked directly at the 4 children. I have heard testimony today from 4 remarkable young people who have demonstrated wisdom, resilience, and loyalty that would be admirable in adults, let alone children their age. Judge Hernandez picked up Riley's presentation materials. These children did not become homeless through parental neglect or abandonment. They became homeless because the very system designed to protect them failed to understand their most fundamental need to remain together as a family unit. She turned to Janet Morrison. Ms. Morrison, your department had custody of these children for exactly 14 days before they fled. During that time, no effort was made to keep them together, and when they expressed distress at separation, they were told their expectations were unrealistic. Morrison's composure cracked slightly. Your Honor, placement of 4 siblings together is extremely difficult to arrange. Difficult, but not impossible, Judge Hernandez interrupted, especially when the alternative is 4 children living on the streets because they refuse to abandon each other. The judge stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. These children survived 6 months of homelessness while maintaining their health, continuing their education through self-directed learning and caring for each other with remarkable maturity. They organized themselves, managed limited resources, and made strategic decisions that kept them safe and together. She returned to the bench. When Mr. Sullivan discovered them, he faced a choice: follow proper procedures that would likely result in their separation, or provide immediate safety while working toward a permanent solution that honored their family bond. Marcus found himself holding his breath. Mr. Sullivan chose family over bureaucracy. He chose love over procedure, and in doing so, he provided these children with exactly what they needed most: an adult who listened to their voices and respected their choices. Judge Hernandez opened her folder. The psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Vasquez confirms that these children are thriving in Mr. Sullivan's care. Their physical health has improved, their educational progress is remarkable, and their emotional stability is directly connected to their ability to remain together. She looked at Janet Morrison again. Ms. Morrison, your recommendation to separate these children flies in the face of everything we know about trauma recovery and family preservation. These children have already lost their mother. To force them to lose each other would be unconscionable. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Therefore, Judge Hernandez announced, this court grants emergency temporary guardianship to Marcus Sullivan for all 4 children, with the requirement that formal adoption proceedings begin immediately. The relief was so overwhelming that Marcus felt dizzy. Beside him, he heard Emma let out a small sob that might have been relief or joy or both. But Judge Hernandez wasn't finished. However, this decision comes with conditions. Mr. Sullivan, you will submit to monthly home inspections for the next 6 months. The children will receive counseling services to help them process their trauma, and you will work with child services to establish a permanent support network. She fixed Marcus with a stern look. This court is taking an unusual step because these children have demonstrated extraordinary wisdom in advocating for themselves. Do not make me regret this decision. I won't, Your Honor, Marcus managed to say, his voice barely steady. Ms. Morrison, the judge continued, I am recommending that your department conduct a comprehensive review of its sibling placement policies. What happened to these children should never happen again. As court was dismissed, Marcus felt small. Arms wrap around him from 4 different directions. His children, legally his children now, clung to him with the desperate relief of people who had narrowly escaped disaster. Margaret Chen was beaming as she packed her files. Congratulations, Marcus. Judge Hernandez doesn't often make speeches like that, but when she does, it usually means she's seen something that touched her deeply. Janet Morrison approached as they prepared to leave. Her expression was complicated. Professional disappointment mixed with something that might have been respect. Mr. Sullivan, she said quietly, I hope you understand that my recommendations weren't personal. Child safety is my priority, and I've seen too many well-intentioned adults fail when faced with the realities of caring for traumatized children. I understand, Marcus replied, and I hope you'll give us a chance to prove that this family can work. Morrison nodded slowly. The judge was right about our placement policies. Maybe it's time we listened more carefully to what children are trying to tell us. The drive home was filled with a mixture of celebration and exhaustion. The children chatted excitedly about their testimony and the judge's decision, but Marcus could see the emotional toll the experience had taken on all of them. That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table sharing pizza, their first meal as a legally recognized family, Emma asked the question that had been weighing on all their minds. What happens now? Marcus looked around the table at four faces that had become the center of his world. Now we figure out how to be a real family. We find a house with enough bedrooms for everyone. We get you enrolled in school. We learn how to navigate normal kid problems instead of survival crises. Connor grinned. Normal problems sound pretty good. Riley was already thinking practically. We'll need to research school districts and educational programs that can accommodate our different interests and skill levels. Austin nodded. And we should probably learn how to cook more than just eggs and whatever's about to expire. Emma's smile was soft but determined. And we keep visiting Mum every week. She needs to know how the story turned out. Over the following weeks, their life transformed in ways both dramatic and subtle. Marcus found a 4-bedroom house in Lincoln Park with a large kitchen, a basement Austin could convert into a workshop, and enough space for Riley's growing collection of books and learning materials. The transition to regular school was challenging for children who had been self-directing their education, but their teachers quickly recognized their exceptional abilities and maturity. Emma excelled in leadership roles. Connor showed remarkable aptitude in science. Riley's mathematical gifts earned him placement in advanced classes, and Austin's technical skills impressed even the high school computer science teacher. Marcus made significant changes to his career, negotiating a remote work arrangement that allowed him to be present for school events, doctor appointments, and the hundreds of small moments that make up family life. His colleagues were initially skeptical of his new priorities, but his increased focus and productivity surprised everyone, including himself. The monthly social services visits became routine check-ins rather than adversarial investigations. The caseworker assigned to their family, Maria Santos, became an ally who helped them navigate educational resources and community programs. 3 months after the court hearing, Dr. Vasquez completed her final evaluation. This family has achieved something remarkable, she told them during their last session. You've created stability and love from circumstances that could have broken you all. She looked at each child individually. Emma, your protective instincts have evolved into genuine leadership skills. Connor, your anger has transformed into passionate advocacy for others. Riley, your intellectual gifts are flourishing in an environment that nurtures rather than threatens them. And Austin, your technical talents are developing alongside your growing confidence in social situations. Then she turned to Marcus. And you've discovered that being a parent isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to learn them alongside your children. As autumn turned to winter, the Sullivan family settled into routines that felt both ordinary and miraculous. Homework around the kitchen table, arguments about chores, weekend trips to museums and libraries, and quiet evenings reading together in the living room. But every Sunday, they still visited Jennifer's grave together, bringing flowers and updates about their week. The children would tell their mother about school achievements, new friends, and the small victories of normal childhood. Standing in the cemetery where their story had begun, Marcus often marveled at the chain of coincidences and choices that had brought them together. A chance encounter on a rainy night had transformed 5 separate individuals into an unbreakable family. The children who had once survived by depending only on each other had learned to trust an adult who proved worthy of that trust. And a man who had thought his life was defined by professional success had discovered that his greatest achievement would always be the day he chose love over convenience and became a father to 4 extraordinary children who needed him as much as he needed them. 1 year later, the Sullivan family stood in the auditorium of Chicago's Millennium Center, surrounded by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by their story. Marcus adjusted his tie nervously as he prepared to speak at the inaugural conference for the Jennifer Sullivan Foundation for Family Preservation, an organization that had grown from their court victory into a nationwide movement. "I never expected to be standing here," Marcus began, looking out at social workers, family court judges, legislators, and families who had fought similar battles. "A year and a half ago, I was a man who had convinced himself that success meant having no one depending on you." In the front row, his children watched with pride. Emma, now 10, had become the Foundation's youngest board member, consulting on policies that affected sibling groups. Connor worked with the Foundation's advocacy team, using his passionate nature to speak at legislative hearings about family preservation. Riley had developed educational curricula for children aging out of foster care, while Austin created technological solutions to help social workers track and maintain family connections. "These 4 extraordinary people taught me that real success means becoming someone others can depend on," Marcus continued. "They showed me that family isn't just about DNA or legal documents, it's about showing up when life gets hard." The audience included Janet Morrison, who had become an unlikely ally after Judge Hernandez's ruling prompted a complete overhaul of Cook County's child placement policies. The new protocols prioritized keeping siblings together and required children's voices to be heard in custody decisions. "The Jennifer Sullivan Foundation exists because 4 children refused to accept that being separated was inevitable," Marcus said. "They survived 6 months on Chicago's streets because they understood something that many adults had forgotten. Family is worth fighting for." Dr. Sarah Hendricks, the pediatrician who had treated Emma's illness, sat with other medical professionals who had joined the Foundation's health initiative. Their program provided comprehensive medical care for children in transitional housing situations, ensuring that health crises didn't become barriers to family reunification. Margaret Chen had used the publicity from their case to establish a legal clinic specializing in emergency custody situations. Her team had successfully kept over 200 sibling groups together in the past year, citing the Sullivan precedent in courtrooms across the country. "But this foundation isn't just about keeping families together," Marcus continued. "It's about recognizing that children, even very young children, often know what they need better than the systems designed to help them." In the audience, Dr. Vasquez nodded approvingly. Her research on the Sullivan children had been published in several psychology journals, contributing to new understanding about resilience in homeless youth and the importance of sibling bonds in trauma recovery. "Emma, Connor, Riley, and Austin didn't just survive homelessness," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. "They created a functioning family unit that prioritized education, health, and mutual support. They developed leadership skills, problem-solving, abilities, and emotional intelligence that many adults never achieve." The Foundation's Youth Advisory Board, comprised entirely of young people who had experienced family separation, had become a powerful voice in child welfare reform. Their recommendations had influenced policy changes in 12 states, always emphasizing the importance of listening to children's perspectives. "Today, I want to share what we've learned from families who've contacted us from across the country," Marcus said, clicking to a presentation slide. "We've discovered that the Sullivan story isn't unique. There are thousands of children who have made similar choices, showing similar wisdom, demonstrating similar strength." The statistics were sobering. Over 40% of sibling groups in foster care were separated unnecessarily, despite research showing the psychological benefits of keeping families together. But the Foundation's advocacy efforts were changing those numbers, state by state, case by case. The Foundation has helped reunite over 800 separated siblings in the past year, Marcus announced, prompting applause from the audience. But more importantly, we've changed the conversation about what children are capable of when adults listen to them. After his speech, Marcus joined his children at a reception where families shared their own stories. A mother thanked Emma for testifying at a legislative hearing that led to policy changes in Texas. A teenage boy credited Connor's advocacy work with helping him maintain contact with his younger siblings while in care. Riley demonstrated the Foundation's new app, designed to help children document their experiences and preferences during custody proceedings. Austin showed off the communication platform he had created to help separated siblings maintain contact with each other and coordinate reunification efforts. As the event wound down, the Sullivan family found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the reception hall. Marcus looked at each of his children, marveling at how much they had grown while remaining fundamentally themselves. "Are you proud of what we've built?" Emma asked, her maturity evident in the way she framed the question. "As a shared accomplishment." "I'm proud of what you've built," Marcus corrected. "This foundation exists because you four refused to accept that your family didn't matter. Every child we've helped stay with their siblings has benefited from your courage." Connor, now 11, and showing signs of becoming taller than his siblings, grinned. "Mom would have loved this, wouldn't she? All these people working to keep families together." Riley nodded thoughtfully. "She always said that love was the most important thing you could give someone. I think we've figured out how to give that to a lot of families." Austin, still the quietest of the four, but no longer shy, added, "And we proved that kids can solve problems if adults let them try." That evening, as had become their tradition, they drove to Riverside Memorial Cemetery. Jennifer's grave was surrounded by flowers left by families the Foundation had helped, cards from children who had been reunited with siblings, and letters from social workers who had changed their approach to family preservation. "Hi, Mum," Emma said softly, kneeling beside the headstone. "We wanted to tell you about the conference today. Hundreds of people came to learn about keeping families together." Connor added, "And Marcus gave a speech about how you taught us that family was worth fighting for, even when we didn't know we were teaching him the same thing." Riley had brought a folder of letters from children around the country. "These are from kids who got to stay with their brothers and sisters because of the Foundation. They wanted to thank you for raising children who wouldn't give up." Austin placed a small device beside the flowers, a digital photo frame that cycled through pictures of reunited families. "We thought you might like to see all the families that are together now because we stayed together then." Marcus stood behind his children, watching them honor the woman whose love had made their family possible. Jennifer had died not knowing that her former boyfriend would someday become the father her children needed, but her influence lived on in every policy they changed, every family they helped, every child whose voice was heard because 4 9-year-olds had demanded their own voices be respected. "Marcus," Emma said, turning to look up at him, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that night in the cemetery?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think about it sometimes. I probably would have continued being successful and lonely. You four would have survived because that's what you do, but you would have had to fight every battle alone." He knelt down beside them. "But we did meet, and everything changed. You taught me that being needed by people you love isn't a burden. It's a gift, and together we've helped other families discover the same thing." As they prepared to leave, Riley asked the question that had been on all their minds. What happens next? With the Foundation, with us, with everything we've started? Marcus smiled, remembering a similar question Emma had asked the morning after their court victory. What happens next is that we keep growing, keep learning, and keep showing up for each other. The foundation will continue its work because there are always families who need advocates, and we'll continue being a family because that's what we chose, and we choose it again every day. Austin looked around the cemetery where their story had begun. It's funny how the place where we thought we were just visiting Mom turned out to be where our whole new life started. Maybe that's how the best things happen, Connor suggested. When you're doing something out of love, other beautiful things grow from it. As they walked back to their car, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them from a chance encounter in a cemetery to a foundation that was changing lives across the country. 4 children who had been surviving on their own had taught him that family wasn't about perfection or having all the answers. It was about commitment, consistency, and the willingness to fight for each other when the world seemed determined to pull you apart. The Sullivan family had started as 5 separate people bound together by circumstance and choice. They had become something larger, a testament to the power of listening to children, honoring family bonds, and believing that love could overcome even the most overwhelming obstacles. Their story had touched thousands of lives, but perhaps more importantly, it had proven that sometimes the most unlikely families, formed in the most unexpected places, could change the world simply by refusing to be separated. As they drove home through the Chicago streets, past the places where they had once struggled, and toward the house where they now thrived, Marcus understood that their greatest victory wasn't winning in court or building a successful foundation. Their greatest victory was the ordinary magic of being a family, homework and bedtime stories, arguments and forgiveness, dreams shared and challenges faced together. 4 children who had once known only survival had learned to flourish. A man who had once chosen solitude had discovered the joy of being chosen by others. And together they had built something that would outlast them all. The understanding that every child deserves to be heard, every family bond deserves protection, and love, when given freely, has the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire systems. The Sullivan story had come full circle, from loss to love, from separation to unity, from survival to success. But it wasn't ending. It was beginning again every day, in the lives of families who now had a voice because 4 brave children had refused to be silenced. 3 months after the foundation conference, Marcus received a phone call that would test everything they had built together. The voice on the other end was familiar yet unexpected. Eleanor Hayes, his former assistant, who had betrayed him years ago during his battle with cancer. "Marcus." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "I know I have no right to call you, but I need help. My daughter, she's in the system, and they're trying to separate her from her little brother." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The woman who had once tried to tear his family apart was now desperately seeking help to keep her own family together. But as he listened to Eleanor's story, a messy divorce, false accusations, and 2 children caught in the middle of adult failures, Marcus felt the familiar pull of advocacy that had driven the foundation's work. "Bring them to the house," Marcus said without hesitation. "We'll figure this out together." That evening, as Eleanor sat in the same kitchen where the Sullivan children had once planned their survival strategies, Marcus watched his 4 children interact with 2 scared kids who were facing the same fears they had once known. Emma, now confident in her role as a protector, immediately took Eleanor's 7-year-old daughter Maya under her wing. "It's scary when adults make decisions about you without asking what you want," Emma said gently, "but there are people who will fight for you." Connor and Riley worked together to explain the legal process to 9-year-old David, using the same matter-of-fact approach that had helped them navigate their own court battle. Austin showed both children the foundation's resources, demonstrating the technology that could help them stay connected even if the worst happened. Margaret Chen, now a close family friend, took Eleanor's case pro bono. Within 2 weeks, using precedents established by the Sullivan case, she had secured temporary custody arrangements that kept David and Maya together while their mother addressed the issues that had led to state intervention. "You didn't have to help me," Eleanor told Marcus as they watched the children playing together in the backyard. "Not after what I did to you." Marcus considered his response carefully. "The foundation exists because we learned that every child deserves an advocate, regardless of the mistakes their parents have made. David and Maya needed help, and we had the resources to provide it." Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes. "I've spent the last year watching the foundation's work from a distance, seeing the families you've helped. I never imagined I'd need that help myself." "That's how life works sometimes," Marcus replied. "We never know when we might be the ones who need a second chance." The success with Eleanor's family led to an unexpected expansion of the foundation's work. They began offering support services for parents whose own past mistakes had led to family separation, providing counseling, legal assistance, and practical help to families trying to rebuild their relationships. Dr. Vasquez developed a new program called Healing Circles, where parents who had successfully reunited with their children mentored those still fighting for custody. Eleanor became one of the program's first success stories, eventually becoming a full-time advocate for other parents navigating the complex world of family court. Meanwhile, the Sullivan children continued to grow and evolve. Emma, now 11, had been invited to speak at the White House Conference on Children and Families. Her testimony about the importance of listening to children's voices led to new federal guidelines requiring child welfare agencies to document and consider children's preferences in placement decisions. Connor's passion for justice had evolved into concrete action. He had started a peer support network for children in foster care, using social media and technology to connect kids across the country who were fighting to stay with their siblings. His network had grown to over 5,000 members, becoming a powerful voice for reform. Riley's intellectual gifts had caught the attention of several universities, but he had chosen to focus his talents on developing new tools for the foundation. His latest project was an AI system that could analyze family court decisions to identify patterns of bias and discrimination, helping lawyers build stronger cases for family preservation. Austin's technical skills had revolutionized how the foundation operated. He had created a comprehensive database that tracked outcomes for families they had helped, providing concrete evidence of their success rates and identifying areas where their methods could be improved. But perhaps the most significant development came when Judge Patricia Hernandez announced her retirement from the bench to join the foundation as its chief legal officer. Her decision sent shockwaves through the family court system and brought unprecedented credibility to their reform efforts. "The Sullivan case changed how I understood my role as a judge," Judge Hernandez explained at her farewell ceremony. "I realized that sometimes the most important thing we can do is listen to the people most affected by our decisions, the children themselves." Her appointment to the foundation coincided with their most ambitious project yet, a national campaign to reform family court procedures across all 50 states. The Children's Voice Initiative sought to ensure that every child involved in custody proceedings had legal representation and the right to express their preferences directly to the court. The campaign faced significant resistance from traditional child welfare advocates who argued that children were too young to make such important decisions. But the Sullivan children had become powerful speakers for their cause, traveling to state capitals and congressional hearings to share their story and advocate for change. During one particularly challenging hearing in Texas, where legislators questioned whether 9-year-olds could really understand the implications of custody decisions, Riley stood up in the gallery and asked to speak. "Sir," Riley said to the committee chairman, "with respect, adults make decisions that affect children every day without fully understanding the implications either. The difference is that we have to live with the consequences of your decisions while you get to go home to your own families." The comment, captured on video and shared millions of times on social media, became a rallying cry for the children's rights movement. Within 6 months, Texas had passed legislation requiring children's voices to be heard in all family court proceedings. As the Foundation's influence grew, so did the Sullivan family's understanding of their unique position in the world. They had become symbols of hope for thousands of families, but they never forgot that their strength came from the ordinary moments of love and support they shared with each other. Marcus had learned to balance his role as a public advocate with his responsibilities as a father. He turned down speaking engagements that would take him away from important family moments, and he made sure that his children never felt like their private lives were public property. "We share our story because it helps other families," he explained to them during one of their regular family meetings. "But you always have the right to say no, to keep parts of your life private, to be normal kids instead of symbols." The children appreciated this balance. They were proud of their advocacy work, but they also treasured their ordinary moments: family game nights, homework struggles, arguments about chores, and the countless small interactions that made them feel like a real family rather than a cause célèbre. On the 2nd anniversary of their court victory, the Sullivan family returned once again to Jennifer's grave. But this time, they weren't alone. Dozens of families they had helped over the years had joined them for what had become known as the Gratitude Gathering. Children who had been reunited with siblings brought flowers and drawings. Parents who had successfully navigated family court with the Foundation's help shared stories of their journeys. Social workers who had changed their practices after learning about the Sullivan case came to pay their respects to the woman whose children had taught them to listen more carefully. "Mom," Emma said, kneeling beside the headstone that was now surrounded by a garden maintained by volunteers, "I think you'd be amazed by how many people understand now that keeping families together is worth fighting for." Marcus looked around at the faces of people whose lives had been touched by his children's courage and Jennifer's love. A teenage girl who had been reunited with her younger brother after 2 years of separation. A grandmother who had gained custody of her grandchildren with the Foundation's help. A former social worker who had left the agency to start her own family preservation program. "You know what I've learned?" Marcus said to his children as the gathering began to disperse. "Your mother's greatest gift wasn't just loving you for. It was teaching you that love means fighting for each other. And that lesson has spread to thousands of families who might have given up if they hadn't seen your example." Connor, now 12 and showing signs of his father's analytical mind, observed, "It's like Mom threw a stone into a pond, and we've been watching the ripples spread ever since." Riley nodded thoughtfully. "Except the ripples keep creating more ripples. Every family we help goes on to help others, and their example helps even more families." Austin, always practical, added, "And now we have data to prove it. The Foundation's impact study shows that families who receive our support are 3 times more likely to maintain stability 5 years later, and their children show significantly better outcomes in education and mental health." Emma smiled at her brother's different ways of understanding their impact. "What I know is that Mom wanted us to take care of each other, and somehow that grew into taking care of lots of families. I think she'd say we did good." As they prepared to leave the cemetery, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them from desperate survival to international recognition. The Sullivan family had not only found each other, they had shown the world what was possible when children's voices were heard, when family bonds were respected, and when love was allowed to triumph over bureaucratic convenience. Their story continued to unfold, not just in the Foundation's work or the policies they had changed, but in the daily choice they made to remain a family. They had proven that the most powerful force for social change was often the simplest, people who refused to accept that love wasn't worth fighting for. The Sullivan legacy was written not just in law books and policy manuals, but in the hearts of thousands of children who would grow up knowing that their voices mattered, their families were worth preserving, and their love for each other was a force that could change the world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.